The bankruptcy papers sat in front of Dominic like a death sentence. His hands were shaking. Not from fear. He was past fear. This was something older. Something that crawls up from 30 years of building and only surfaces when a man is about to destroy it himself. In 7 minutes, his lawyer would walk through those doors. In 7 minutes, it would all be over. But a waitress was already moving toward his table. And she was about to say 5 words that would save his life. "Sir. That deal is a trap." The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Dominic Graves sat alone in the marble lobby of his own building, well, what used to be his building. Outside, the city was already moving, already indifferent, the way cities always are when one man's world is ending. In here, time had stopped completely. 7:53 a.m. 7 minutes until Richard Chin arrived with his briefcase and his cold smile. 7 minutes until Dominic signed away 30 years and a name that wasn't just his, it was his father's. His hand moved toward the pen. Then stopped. His fingers were shaking. Not from fear. He was done being afraid. This was something deeper and quieter, the body's last protest before the mind finishes what it started. The kind of tremor that doesn't arrive at the beginning of a man's destruction. It arrives at the end. When he's already decided to let go. And his hands are the only part of him that hasn't agreed yet. He pressed the pen to the paper. That was the moment Faye Miller set down her coffee pot and walked toward him. Not with pity the way everyone else looked at him now, but with something sharp and certain in her eyes that didn't belong in a lobby. It didn't belong on a waitress. He didn't look up. He should have. You're about to make the same mistake. You already felt something. You leaned in at 7:53 a.m. You held your breath when Faye picked up that coffee pot. And now you're thinking about leaving. Don't. Hit the subscribe button. Like and share, somebody else might want to watch and enjoy like you do. It's the only thing standing between you and walking away from the best part. People who say, "I'll come back later," never find out how it ends. They just spend their lives almost knowing. Faye is already talking. The button is right there. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Dominic Graves sat alone in the marble lobby of his own building, well, what used to be his building. Outside, the city was already moving, already indifferent, the way cities always are when one man's world is ending. In here, time had stopped completely. 7:53 a.m. 7 minutes until Richard Chin arrived with his briefcase and his cold smile. 7 minutes until Dominic signed away 30 years and a name that wasn't just his, it was his father's. He stared at the gold Montblanc pen resting between his fingers. His father had pressed it into his palm the morning of his first boardroom meeting. "This pen built the empire," the old man had said. "Don't ever let anyone watch you drop it." He had been 26 then. Hungry. Certain. Standing in a room full of men twice his age and not flinching once. He barely recognized that man now. The lobby was quiet except for the soft clink of cups from the ground floor cafe and the distant murmur of staff who had stopped meeting his eyes 3 weeks ago. He had noticed. He always noticed. That was the cruelest part of falling, you didn't go blind. You saw everything. Every turned back. Every whispered conversation that stopped the moment he entered a room. Every face that used to light up and now just went carefully, professionally neutral. His board had voted him out on a Tuesday. His wife had filed papers on a Thursday. His oldest son hadn't returned a single call since. And here he was. A Friday morning. Marble floors. A bespoke suit that felt like a funeral shroud. And $10 billion worth of failure spread across the table in front of him, waiting for his signature like it had all the time in the world. His hand moved toward the document. Then stopped. His fingers were shaking. Not from fear. He was done being afraid. This was something deeper and quieter, the body's last protest before the mind finishes what it started. 7:54 a.m. 6 minutes left. And somewhere behind him, a coffee pot clinked against a saucer. He didn't look up when she approached. He never looked up anymore. There was nothing left to see in people's faces that he hadn't already seen, pity dressed as professionalism, sympathy wearing a corporate mask. He had grown tired of all of it. The coffee pot appeared at the edge of his peripheral vision. A soft pour. The quiet discipline of someone who had learned to move through rooms without disturbing them. "More coffee, Mr. Graves?" No. She didn't leave. That was the first thing he noticed. Everyone left when he said no. Lawyers. Board members. His own family. The word had become a door he closed and people respected it, relieved even to have permission to walk away. But this woman, this waitress in her stained apron and tight ponytail, stood perfectly still like she hadn't heard him at all. He looked up. She was young. Late 20s. Her expression wasn't pity. It wasn't sympathy. It was something focused and unsettling, the look of someone carrying information that was too heavy to hold alone. She leaned down slowly. Carefully. The way you move around something dangerous. And she whispered, "Sir, that deal is a trap." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Dominic straightened. His jaw tightened. 30 years of empire building had given him an instinct for when people were wasting his time, and every rational part of him said this was exactly that. A waitress with a coffee pot and an opinion, 5 minutes before the most important moment of his professional life. "Excuse me." His voice was low. Controlled. A warning in itself. She didn't flinch. "Page 47, she said quietly. "Riverside Holdings. The liability is counted twice. And the hospital contract on page 31, that revenue didn't disappear. It was just moved. Someone didn't want you to find it." She straightened up. Tucked the coffee pot against her side. "I could be wrong," she said. "But I don't think I am." 7:56 a.m. 4 minutes left. Dominic Graves stared at the woman who had no business knowing any of that. And for the first time in weeks, his hands stopped shaking. "Show me." 2 words. That was all he said. But the way he said them, quiet, stripped of everything except pure intent, made Faye set the coffee pot down on the table without hesitation. She pulled the document toward her like she had done it 100 times before. No trembling. No apology. Just clean, certain hands flipping to page 47 with the efficiency of someone who had spent years inside numbers for a living. "Here." She pointed. "Riverside Holdings. Listed under current liabilities, $2.1 million. That's the March assessment." Her finger moved 2 lines down. "And here it is again. Same asset. Different column heading. Another $2.1 million. Someone renamed the category and resubmitted it hoping no one would cross-reference the original filing." Dominic leaned in. His tired eyes moved across the page slowly. Then again. Faster. His jaw tightened. "That's a $4.2 million error," he said. "It's not an error," Faye said. The correction was gentle but absolute. Errors go in one direction. This one was precise. She turned to page 31 without being asked. The hospital contract. Mercy General. A 5-year infrastructure deal worth $6.8 million in projected revenue. Revenue his lawyers had quietly buried under a reclassification footnote so small it required a magnifying glass and the specific suspicion that something was hidden to find it at all. "They didn't remove it," Faye said. "They just made it invisible. Reclassified as a contingent asset and pushed into the appendix. If this deal closes today, those assets get seized as part of the liability settlement." She paused. "Your company isn't insolvent, Mr. Graves. Not even close. Someone just needed you to believe it was." The lobby felt different now. The marble colder. The silence sharper. Dominic sat back slowly. 30 years of instinct assembling itself from the wreckage of the last 3 weeks, piece by piece, like a fist closing. Someone had built this trap carefully. Someone who knew exactly where to hide the numbers. Someone who had access. 7:58 a.m. 2 minutes left. And through the glass doors, a black car had just pulled up outside. The glass doors opened at exactly 7:59 a.m. Richard Chin walked in first. He always walked in first, that was the thing about Richard. He had built an entire career on entering rooms before anyone was ready for him. Slim, impeccable, carrying a brushed leather briefcase that probably cost more than Faye's monthly salary. His suit was the color of a shark. His smile was the same. Dominic. Not Mr. Graves. Just Dominic. The casual authority of a man who believed the power had already shifted. "You're here early. Good sign." Dominic said nothing. Richard's eyes moved to Faye. A half-second assessment, apron, ponytail, coffee pot, and then she was dismissed. Filed away as furniture. He pulled out the chair across from Dominic and set his briefcase down with the soft click of a man who considered this meeting already finished. Then the second figure stepped through the doors. Patricia Graves. Ex-wife. Former co-director. The woman who had sat across from Dominic at every dinner, every board meeting, every quiet Sunday morning for 19 years, and had signed her own legal separation 11 days after the board vote. Not 12. Not 10. 11. As though she had been counting down. She looked extraordinary. That was the brutal part. While Dominic had been dismantling, Patricia had been assembling. Sharp blazer, hair precise, the careful composure of a woman who had already grieved this and moved on to logistics. She didn't look at him with cruelty. That would have been easier. She looked at him with the flat patience of someone waiting for a formality to conclude. "Let's get this done," she said. No greeting. No softness. Just the clean efficiency of erasure. Richard slid the signature page across the table. A pen appeared beside it, his pen, a sleek corporate thing. A replacement for the Montblanc already in Dominic's hand. The message was not subtle. Page 1, page 12, and the back declaration, Richard said. 20 minutes and you're free. Free. The word landed like a slap. Dominic looked down at the papers. Then he looked at Faye. She hadn't moved. He picked up the Montblanc. The lobby went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something irreversible is about to happen. Richard leaned back with the satisfied stillness of a man watching a transaction close. Patricia folded her hands on the table. Even the distant clatter of the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Dominic pressed the pen to the signature line. The ink touched paper. And stopped. Not gradually. Not with hesitation. It stopped the way a man stops when something deep and wordless grabs him by the collar, the kind of stop that bypasses thought entirely and lives somewhere older, somewhere below reason, in the part of a human being that still knows the difference between surrender and destruction. His hand did not move. Dominic. Richard's voice carried the first trace of something that wasn't confidence. Sign the document. Silence. Dominic. Page 47. His voice was quiet. Almost gentle. The way very dangerous things sometimes are. Richard blinked. I'm sorry. Riverside Holdings. Dominic lifted the pen from the paper. Set it down beside the document with a care that somehow felt more threatening than fury. The liability is listed twice. 2.1 million, March assessment. 2.1 million, reclassified column. Same asset. Different heading. He looked up for the first time. Would you like to explain that to me, Richard? The color in Richard's face did something interesting. That's a clerical. And page 31, Dominic continued. The Mercy General Contract. 6.8 million in projected revenue. Buried in the appendix as a contingent asset. He paused. Was that clerical as well? Patricia's composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. Her eyes moved to Richard with a sharpness that confirmed everything Dominic needed to know about who else had seen these numbers before today. He stood up. I want a 13th review, he said. Independent forensic accountants. Every liability. Every reclassified asset. Every footnote. He buttoned his jacket. And until that review is complete, nobody touches this filing. Richard stood too. His chair scraped back hard. You don't have the authority. This is still my building, Richard. Dominic picked up the Montblanc. And that was still my name on the door. He looked at Faye. Come with me. The third-floor conference room had been built to intimidate. Dominic had designed it that way himself. 22 feet of glass overlooking the city, a table long enough to seat 16, lighting calibrated to make whoever sat at the far end feel small. He had won negotiations in this room. Buried competitors. Closed deals that rewrote entire industries. He had never walked into it feeling like the underdog. Until today. Richard had made 3 phone calls in the elevator. Patricia had made 2. By the time the doors opened on the 3rd floor, the room was already filling. 2 associates from Richard's firm, a risk analyst Dominic didn't recognize, and a woman in a gray suit who introduced herself as the court-appointed oversight representative and looked at Dominic like he was already a footnote. Faye sat at the far end of the table. Still in her apron. Surrounded by men in suits that cost more than her car. She didn't fidget. Didn't apologize for being there. She opened the document to page 47 and waited. That alone told Dominic everything he needed to know about who she really was. The forensic accountants arrived 18 minutes later. 2 of them. Sent by a firm Richard had not selected and could not dismiss. They worked in silence for 11 minutes while the room watched and no one spoke. The senior accountant looked up first. The Riverside Holdings liability, he said carefully, appears in 2 separate classifications under different column designations. The duplication totals $4.2 million. He paused the way professionals pause when the news is worse than expected. Additionally, the Mercy General Contract revenue has been reclassified in a manner that would trigger automatic seizure upon filing. He set his pen down. If this bankruptcy had been filed this morning, Mr. Graves, the seizure would have been irreversible. The room didn't explode. It did something quieter and more devastating. It went completely still. Richard's associate leaned toward him and whispered something urgent. Richard didn't respond. Patricia was staring at the table. Dangerously wrong, the second accountant said quietly, almost to himself. These numbers are dangerously wrong. Dominic turned slowly and looked at Richard Chin. Richard looked away first. The room emptied slowly. Richard left without a word. The first time in 30 years Dominic had watched that man leave a room without having the last one. The associates followed. The oversight representative gathered her papers with a careful neutrality of someone who had seen enough to write a very detailed report and intended to. Patricia was last. She paused at the door. For one moment, just one, something human moved across her face. Something that looked almost like relief. Then the mask returned, and she was gone. The forensic accountants packed quietly in the corner. And then it was just Dominic and Faye, sitting at opposite ends of a 22-foot table, the city sprawling indifferent and enormous behind the glass. "Who are you?" he asked. Not unkindly. Just directly. She was quiet for a moment. Her hands rested flat on the table, steady, the way they had been steady all morning. 3 years ago, I was a senior auditor at Carter & Associates, she said. We had a client. Construction firm. Their CFO had been systematically burying liabilities in reclassified columns for 18 months. She paused. I found it. I flagged it. I put it in writing and handed it to my managing partner. Another pause, longer this time. 6 weeks later the client collapsed. The CFO walked away. And I was named in the internal review as the auditor who missed the discrepancies. Dominic said nothing. He understood the architecture of that kind of betrayal. I lost my license, Faye said simply. My firm needed someone to absorb the damage, and I was the quietest person in the room. She looked at the document still open on the table. I've been working downstairs for 14 months. And this morning I watched a man about to be handed the exact same destruction I was, except his name was on the building. She finally looked up. I couldn't watch it happen again, she said. Not when I could see exactly what they'd done. Dominic studied her for a long moment. 30 years had taught him to read people the way others read balance sheets. And everything in Faye Miller read completely, undeniably true. He sat with it for a long time. The room had emptied. The city moved silently behind the glass. The bankruptcy papers sat at the end of the table where the forensic accountants had left them, flagged, annotated, rendered monstrous by 11 minutes of quiet professional scrutiny. Dominic stared at them the way a man stares at the edge of something he almost walked off. 7 minutes. That was all it had taken. 7 minutes between destruction and the first honest breath he had drawn in 3 weeks. 7 minutes and a waitress who had no reason to save him and did it anyway. He thought about the pen. His father's pen. How close it had come to signing his name into a trap built by the very people he had paid to protect him. Richard Chin. 14 years. 2 landmark mergers. A partnership built on handshakes and deference and the quiet assumption that loyalty was a thing you could purchase with enough billable hours. He had been wrong about that. He picked up his phone and dialed. Richard answered on the second ring with the careful steadiness of a man who had spent the last 20 minutes constructing a defense. He didn't get to use it. You reviewed these documents 12 times, Dominic said. No anger in his voice. Something colder than anger. 12 separate reviews. Your firm's name is on every single one. A pause. Either you missed a $4.2 million duplication that a waitress caught in 4 minutes, which means you are catastrophically incompetent, or you didn't miss it at all. Silence on the line. Which is it, Richard? More silence. The damning, bottomless kind. Dominic ended the call. He set the phone down and pressed both palms flat against the table. Breathed. Let the full weight of it settle, not just Richard's betrayal, but his own. His own pride that had stopped fighting. His own exhaustion that had mistaken surrender for peace. He had handed these people the pen himself. That would not happen again. He looked at Faye. She was watching him with that same quiet certainty. Still waiting. Still steady. I almost let them bury me, he said. I know, she said. That's why I said something. He withdrew the filing at 11:17 a.m. 3 hours and 24 minutes after he had walked into his own lobby prepared to end everything. 3 hours and 24 minutes that had dismantled a trap, exposed a betrayal, and quietly, irreversibly, returned something to Dominic Graves that no bankruptcy court could have ever adjudicated. His will to fight. The paperwork was brief. Almost insultingly so, a single withdrawal form that undid months of carefully engineered destruction in 4 lines and a signature. He signed it with the Mont Blanc. His father's pen. The one he had almost used to finish himself. It felt entirely different this time. He rode the elevator back down to the lobby alone. The same marble floors. The same indifferent city beyond the glass. But the light seemed to sit differently now, sharper, less funereal, like a room after someone has finally opened a window. Faye was at the counter, back in her apron, coffee pot in hand, moving through the quiet morning rhythm of a woman who had detonated a boardroom and returned to work without fanfare, because that was simply who she was. He walked to the counter and sat down. She poured the coffee without being asked. "It's done," he said. She nodded once. No celebration. No relief performed for his benefit. Just the steady acknowledgement of someone who had known it would be. Dominic wrapped both hands around the cup, looked at the counter for a moment, then looked up. "I need a lead auditor," he said. "Someone who reads numbers the way other people read faces. Someone who can't be bought, can't be intimidated, and doesn't need a title to walk into a room full of lawyers and be the most dangerous person there." Faye was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "My license was revoked," she said. "I have attorneys who can fix that," he said. "Better ones than Richard Chin." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. She set the coffee pot down. The death sentence was over. And somewhere on the 3rd floor, a gold Montblanc pen sat on a 22-foot table pointing toward a city that had no idea what was coming next. He came in to sign away everything. He left with the one person he could actually trust. But withdrawing the filing was only the beginning, because Richard Chin didn't act alone. And Patricia's pause at that door? That wasn't guilt. That was a warning. The real story starts now. Subscribe. You don't want to be the person who stopped here.